Thank you, Madam Chair. This will be a question for Mr. McConnell. SoftBank, a Japanese company, has offered to purchase Sprint. My understanding is the National Security Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has a review ongoing. Do you have any concerns about placing a major infrastructure provider like Sprint, which has some security issues for our national security, under the control of SoftBank?
Yes, I do. If you're in the intelligence business, as I was and some would argue still am, the one thing you would love to do is to run the infrastructure for some other country if you considered them a potential adversary. So having a foreign country own and control telecommunications industry inside the United States, I would not be in favor of.
All right, I appreciate that. I do want to get back to, because I found it very interesting and I'm very concerned about the electromagnetic pulse issue, but I do want to give Mr. Hiley an opportunity to respond. There have been some comments that the current structure won't work. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree.
Tell me why.
There's an item called the Electric Subsector Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is part of NERC, and it was stated earlier that NERC can't respond quickly enough to developing threats, but the whole purpose of this center is to disseminate developing threats as soon as they're released by government. Part of the information sharing work that's done. As soon as they can declassify a threat, whether it's physical or cyber, that is sent out to the utilities, and believe me, we respond when we get those actionable threat updates. Recently, the CEOs met with a number of cabinet-level officials to discuss threats to the electric system, and EMP was not raised as a top priority, top concern, but I can guarantee that when we're informed of that, we will respond. FERC has just ordered...
But let me say, don't you think that should be a major concern? I mean, we do have two enemies, and of course then there are natural causes as well that might cause this problem. Don't you think it should have been discussed, and shouldn't it be on the list?
Absolutely. It's of great concern.
Okay. Let me go back to you, if I might, Ambassador Woolsey, because I do find this very interesting, and in this whole discussion, we've talked about launching south, and who else gets affected? Because obviously it's not just going to be the United States. If you release that magnetic pulse out there, who else is going to? If you launch south from either Iran or North Korea, what other countries are going to be impacted, and are they going to, I guess what I'm asking also is, are they going to be impacted, or can they launch it in such a way that it doesn't affect them as well?
Depends on the altitude the detonation occurs at and where it is. The lower the altitude, the less you get of at least one of the three types of electromagnetic pulse effects. Because some of the effect is line of sight, and others of the effects travel along the transmission lines and so forth. So it's kind of a complicated question. You're probably okay on the other side of the Earth from the detonation, but it would certainly be the case that if the heart of the United States was taken out of the electric grid by something like this, certainly Canada would be in very serious trouble and the like. It would also be pretty difficult, I think, although perhaps not impossible, to detonate at an appropriate altitude to only affect a relatively small country. I think it's the better witness on this than me is Peter Pry, who's sitting behind me, who worked on both of the electromagnetic pulse commissions. And
maybe they can steer us to some information that we can look at on that issue.
Be glad to.
And then you made a comment earlier that it was less likely, and probably understandable because they're our enemies, but that they're also, there was also the threat of the solar-based impulse. Can you explain that a little bit? And when was the last time we had one strong enough to take out the electric grid?
The huge one was in 1859, and most of the physicists and people who study the sun and work on these things think that the big ones occur about once a century, and we're about 150 years, so we're about 50 years overdue, but these things don't occur with real regularity. There have been several since at a much lower level than the one that occurred in 1859.
Let me stop you there, because another one of my questions that I'm interested in is, doesn't that also have impacts on our weather conditions, and what happened in 1859 with the weather?
I don't know that, but solar events of all different kinds, including much smaller ones than this, have rather substantial effects sometimes on weather and climate. But you need somebody up here who...
I understand. You can go on back to what you do know. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Well, and go ahead and tell me some more about well, I'm out of time anyway. Maybe we can have this discussion another time or at a later date. I
I'd be
appreciate it,
glad to.
Madam Chair, and yield back.
The gentleman yells back.